This podcast is a quest for well-being, a quest for a meaningful life through the exploration of fundamental truth. Enlightening ideas, insights on physical, mental, and spiritual health. The inspiration is love. The aspiration is to awaken new ways of thinking that can lead us to a new way of being well. Welcome to Body, Mind, and Soul Healing Conversations.
Living in Process is the work that was originally developed by Dr. Wilson Schaef and continues to evolve and be facilitated by longtime members of her Living in Process training. The Living in Process work is about living, spiritual living, and living spiritually. Dr. Wilson Schaef originally named the healing work she was doing Living in Process, LIP, in the early 1980s as she brought together her life experience as a Cherokee and the traditional ways she was raised with her vast education in clinical psychology and her life experiences living in Western culture, which she has named the Addictive System and the Technocratic, Materialistic, Mechanistic System. We all have the opportunity to live completely, fully, wholly, joyfully, and serenely with our spirituality expressed in every facet of our lives. Deep inside, we resonate with that promise, yet may have lost our way back. Living in Process is an invitation to journey into that deep movement of the all-encompassing spirituality that exists in each one of us and feels in tune with the life force within and beyond us all, whatever we may choose to call it or however we may choose to approach it. Each of us has the possibility to move into our spiritual wisdom and link with the oneness of it all. We only have to remember and reconnect with what we have forgotten and moved away from. Many cultures of the world have no word for spirituality. In these cultures, spirituality is in the living. It is so integrated into life that it needs no separate designation. Yet, many of us have lost that integration as we try to cope with our lives. Living in Process is the reintegration of the spiritual into all that we do and all that we are. By segmenting ourselves and our lives, we have reduced the spiritual to a very small corner of our lives. Living in Process is about the relearning of living our wholeness. After over 4 decades of working with people around the world, Dr. Schaef came to see that all human problems are ultimately spiritual. They result from our splitting off and compartmentalizing our spirituality and not recognizing it at all. Since we are all spiritual beings, our solutions to our problems must come from our spiritual wholeness. All healing is based in our spiritual wholeness. The secret of living a whole life is accepting and being wholly who we are as full spiritual beings. However, at the beginning of the 21st century, we find ourselves estranged from our oneness in God and ourselves. We cannot embrace the fullness of spirituality without accepting the reality of life as a process and participating in the process of our lives. We cannot be observers in our own lives and expect to know and experience our full spiritual selves. We must first acknowledge our role in the process that has created our present reality and accept our role as active participants in all of life's process in order to move in the direction of healing. We must see how our current worldview has contributed to where we are in our lives as a species, and in so doing, be ready to move to new ways of being and living. Valeria Tellis interviews Pete Sidley. Pete has been in the Living in Process training with Dr. Ann Wilson Schaef since 1987 and has worked with her as her right-hand man and the group co-facilitator since 1994. He helped Dr. Schaef in the process and production of all her books since the early 90s, including Living in Process, Meditations for Living in Balance, Daily Reminders for Living a New Paradigm, Native Wisdom for White Minds, and There Will Be 1,000 Years of Peace and Prosperity, and They Will Be Ushered In by the Women. Like everybody in the Living in Process work, Pete is doing his own personal recovery work and has been doing so for 35 years. He has traveled extensively throughout the world with Anne, organizing and facilitating workshops and training sessions, and also carried luggage, typed manuscripts, pushed wheelchairs, cooked, made travel arrangements, and was the memory bank for Anne in the last years of her life. Here is the interview with Pete Sidley.
In your own words, who is Pete Sidley?
Who is Pete Sidley? Well, I'm right here. I am a person that's been in recovery for pretty much my whole life, and I live in Arkansas. I have spent most of my adult life working with Dr. Ann Wilson Schaef, who we're going to be talking about in a bit here, I think. And she was one of the most important people I've ever known, and I think she's awesome. And I learned a lot about spirituality and life and all kinds of things from her, and I'm grateful to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you. So before we talk about the living in process, I have a few warm-up questions, as I mentioned, off record. And the first warm-up question is, what is life to you, Pete?
What is life to me? Well, I would say that the meaning of life is to live it. Actually, that's a quote from Anne. Another quote that I think has been important to me is what she said about spirituality is participation. And so I think that's a big part of what life is for me, is just participating, whatever that may mean. Like right now, we're in the coronavirus, and participating often is, living here at my house and doing the work that we're doing, and walking the dogs, and just dealing with whatever comes into my path and participating with it. That always has made some sense to me, is participation. And so that's what I would say is what I strive to do on a daily basis, is participate in my life and with the people around me and the planet and communities here and family and everything.
Right. What would you say is the opposite of life?
Well, for one thing, one of the things that I try not to do is get into a dualism of life or not life. To me, I call that alcoholic thinking, dualistic thinking. So I can't, that sort of bends my mind in the directions that I don't usually go. And I didn't, I could say there's things that I do that I think I would say take me away from life or take people away from life. And I'd say, no, one is addictions. I think one of the purpose of addictions is to keep us out of touch of who we are and what we're here for and what we know and our spirituality. And I think there's a lot of other things that are, non-life-giving, like certainly dishonesty. I think dishonesty is one of the big things, of what life is not. I one time I heard the quote from, I think it was Gandhi or whatever. He said, "Truth is life and life is truth." And that really struck me. And I always find that just telling the truth is really life-giving. And I've also found that not telling the truth is really not life-giving. It's really non-living. But again, I try to stay out. I really don't believe that life is a dualism. And so I wouldn't sort of frame things in those terms.
Yes. Now I understand what you're saying, that perspective that everything is non-dual. There's no right. Which doesn't take away the beauty of you being you, me being here in this body and nature. In order for non-duality to experience itself, it seems like duality, it's needed. My next warm-up question is about freedom. What is the meaning of freedom to you?
Freedom to me, I would say, well, certainly unscheduled time is freedom. Often with the work that we do, we have often are really busy. Even during the COVID-19, we have scheduled meetings with our groups around the world and other things going on. And so being busy I often find just being unscheduled feels like freedom to me. So, I would say that's one definition. But of course, there's probably a lot of others. I certainly feel free when I'm not being under attack. Recently, sometimes people kind of come after us or come after it, and I think it's really nice when that's not happening. So that's what I would say about freedom.
Yeah, I like that, Pete. Yeah, this the time, the idea, concept of time, and then the timeless. Like going back to that idea of separation, the opposites, it seems like they can't really exist without the other. They're kind of, it's this through the rules of time and the physical rules, and then the timeless. We are able, some of us, to combine those two and to bring them in harmony, and that's when I'd say miracles happen.
I was just going to say again, I really don't go in the direction of dualisms, of one or the other. I mean, I do know what you're saying about timelessness. I mean, there's a lot of experiences that I have, I think that people have that where time is really timeless. Like certainly, recently, as we're going to talk about, I'm sure in a few minutes, Anne died, and it's like the dying process was, there was a lot of timelessness in that, and even going through often some of the medical treatment, sometimes that was timeless. And I know that's true with birth too, and sometimes injuries or, that. And I also find it timeless often when I'm doing something that I'm just being really engaged, being engaged in writing or being engaged even in playing baseball or whatever it might be. I often find that is timeless, or even being engaged in a conversation with a friend, is often timeless. So,
yes, although we have to schedule, and like you said, the freedom, not having scheduled appointments, that very much resonates, like freedom from what, really? So I really love what you're saying in a way that everything is just life itself, that participation that you talked about. So in that sense, yeah, there's no duality, right?
yes.
But doesn't really take away talking about it. I guess that's the only thing, because the conversation, this is duality at play right now. But it's not a conversation about duality, and that I understand what you mean. But even the questions that I ask, it kind of implies that there is something else out there. Like my next question, at this time, what do you think is the world's greatest need, and what is your vision for a new reality?
Well, maybe I'll answer the second part of that first. When the vision for a new reality, I actually think that a new reality is a process. I think that we can't know what we need or what we might want or what the world will look like, and until it happens. I mean, as we unfold, like I think it's easy to get for people to sort of name a utopia or picture a utopia or picture what it would look like, and I really believe that the solution is a process. And that as we go around, like I really see that in the world right now with the coronavirus. It's like, one of the problems I think we have is accepting that we only know what we know right now. We only have this much information about what the vaccines are and this much information about, how it spreads, and it's hard to make a lot of decisions or or picture the future when we don't know. And I think as it unfolds, like tomorrow or next week, we're always knowing more, and we'll always, and that will help us as we, try to deal with this. And I think it's the same with like changing the world, quote unquote. It's like it's a process. We can never. I think we're making a mistake trying to, make a picture of it and then try to attain that. I'm more a believer in process where, we try to do the next right thing or try to deal with what we have right now and move forward and see how the solution emerges. So that's how I would answer the second part of that question. I'm sorry, I forgot the first part of the question.
At this time, what is the world's greatest need, in your opinion?
I don't know. I think we have so many needs. I mean, I think the planet is really hurting, and I think with all the problems of coronavirus and all the pain that people are in, there is some good at the planet. There is some good things happening on the planet. I was driving into town the other day, and we stopped to help a turtle get across the road, and there's no cars, and we were just saying like, wow, isn't it amazing how many turtles are living right now because of the coronavirus, or how much roadkill isn't there because of, not so many cars. But, I think that the earth is, in dire need, and the spirituality. I mean, I think, I believe that, it kind of takes us to a higher level, the spirituality, and we can, I know for myself, and I see in the people around me in different systems that when they are connected to themselves, they're not as destructive, or they can move beyond petty grievances or petty conflicts or something like that. I think there's a lot of needs. It's hard to pinpoint just one.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I like your comment about process. Saying the same way, I guess, we talk about healing as being this continuous work. In a way, it comes to mind imagination. So I'm wondering if just being here now and living whatever life brings, giving ourselves to life, which is a wonderful idea. I'm just wondering if that takes away imagination, having visions for a future that's not really a future. It's everything's happening now. So,
yeah, I mean, I would probably say so. Yes, I think one of the important things is just to try not to get stuck on my agenda. Like, yeah, I can imagine, like, again, I know I keep talking about the coronavirus, but I think we have a lot of opportunities as a species and as a planet to grow, to even make a paradigm shift with what we're dealing with now, like to change some of the things that we are right now. And so I would say I imagine, what it would be like if we, drop some of the economic beliefs that we have, or some of the customary beliefs that we have, and went a different direction, of like sharing more or something like that. So yeah, I would say I imagine, and I think it's important though not to get stuck on sort of forcing my agenda to get to that imagination if it's not happening. So, but yeah, sure.
yeah, I agree, because it seems like it's that imagination is somehow necessary so we can change the way of thinking first, and then in the process, going to the point of being, like you call it, non-dual, which is a wonderful vision to live like that. My next question is about love. What is love to you?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I'll share an experience that I had with Anne one time, which really was important for me. And that is, we were in Hawaii. We spent a lot of time in Hawaii, and I remember one time we were out garage sailing on a Saturday morning, and I was in some sort of a bad mood of some reason I can't remember. And Anne said, what do you love about Hawaii? And I said, what do I love about Hawaii? Oh my God, where do I start? I love the flowers. I love the land. I love the weather. I love the sky. I love the ocean. I mean, and I went on and on. And she said something like that. That is like a connection to a higher power. If you're in touch with that love, it's a connection to a higher power. And that makes a lot of sense to me. And I think there's a lot of things, I think, when I'm at my best, I would say, I love everything. I love my office that I'm sitting in and the bushes outside, and I love this conversation, and, and the sky, and it's rainy and cold right now, and I love that, and so I would say I would say it's like a connection to the all that is.
Yeah, beautiful. What is your understanding and idea of peace?
Well, I would say maybe there's different levels of that. Certainly, internal peace is one thing, and that probably is the in some ways the best kind. Having internal just serenity. I have a friend that did a keto for a while, and I know very little about a keto, but I know what one of the things they talked about was, like when they were throwing a movement at each other, like their idea wasn't to like combat a movement thrown at them. It was more like to neutralize it, and sort of move with it and like kind of be one with it, or I'm not sure how to describe it, but, and I'm sure I'm butchering that. If anybody listening is into keto, I'm sorry, I don't really know that, but just like general concept of like, taking something that's not peaceful and like processing it and coming out the other end. I think that's peaceful. Like there's the title of one of Anne's latest books was called "There Will Be 1,000 Years of Peace and Prosperity, and they will be ushered in by the women." And I know one of the things she talked about in that book is like, women coming together and just talking often is peace creating, and that makes sense to me, actually.
Yeah. Yes. What, where, and who is God to you, Pete?
Well, first of all, I think that God is a process. There again, I know I'm quoting Anne all the time. As I mentioned, she was my biggest teacher probably, and one of the things she said was, why would a static God create an unstatic universe? And that I just thought that was brilliant, and that's almost kind of hard to wrap my head around even, but I do think that's, my own personal experience of, kind of coming to, growing up, I would say I was going to say no awareness of God, but it's not even that. It's like not even no conceptualization of God. Maybe that's more, because I do think that we all have a relationship with God, whether or not we know it or not, with a higher power, or, the great mystery, or whatever, the creator, whatever you want to call it. I think we're all part of it. And so, so growing up, I do think I was part of, the creation and the creator. And I think as I came along and have grown up, it's, I guess, my concept of God, or my experience of God. I like to focus more on my experience of God more than my concept of God. My experience of God has just changed, like I think 10 years ago, if you asked me this question, I probably would have had a different answer than I have now. And same 20 years ago and 30 years ago, because I think, the creator is changing, and I think I'm changing, and we're all changing. And so that's what comes up for me about that.
Yeah. I have two more warm-up questions. What do you think is the purpose of life itself?
To live it.
Yeah. Do you think we all have unique purposes, missions, and unique gifts?
Yeah, I think so. I sometimes someone said to me, we're all part of the spiritual puzzle, and if we don't take our place, then there's an empty puzzle piece in the whole, quilt of life. So yeah, I do think we all have our unique place and our unique purpose. Obviously, I think a lot of people don't know what that is, and again, I'm gonna always harp back to this, but I think it's a process. Like I think my purpose and our purpose is changes, and some people's may stay more the same, but some people's may change too, their purpose for being here or whatever. So again, I think it's about participating and seeing what the Creator has put in front of you, and to participate and live your life, and your purpose will unfold.
Mm. What do you think is your unique purpose at this time, in this moment, more precisely?
My unique purpose?
Yeah.
My unique purpose right now is talking to you.
I like that. That's really great.
Yeah.
Really great. So let's talk about the living in process. So my first question is, who is Dr. Ann Wilson Schaef?
Schaef. Okay. Anne was she was a writer and a lecturer and a seminar leader, and she recently died about 3-4 months ago at the age of 85. She was raised in a traditional Cherokee upbringing. Her ancestors came over. We were a little unclear if her ancestors came over on the Trail of Tears or if they came over before the Trail of Tears, but her Cherokee ancestors came over to this area in Arkansas, Oklahoma, and they raised her in the traditional Cherokee way. One of the realities back in the 30s and 40s when she was growing up was that they were taking the Native Americans to the residential schools. And so since she passed for white, her parents never told her that she was Cherokee. And so, but at the same time, teaching her all the Cherokee ways of life. And so Anne grew up kind of all over the United States. Her dad worked for the government, and so she had a feeling of sort of being at home all over the United States. And eventually went to college and got her PhD, and was originally a psychotherapist for a while after she finished all her studies and stuff. And she started writing. Her first book was called Women's Reality. It came out in 1981. And she since, after that, she wrote 17 more books. And one of her books was called When Society Becomes an Addict, in which she compared Western culture to an active alcoholic. And she wrote a lot about women's issues and what she saw in the culture. And she had some meditation books. I think her best-selling book was one called Meditations for Women Who Do Too Much. And at the same time, she developed this work called Living in Process. She actually left the field of psychotherapy and that whole scientific model to create an alternative form of healing based on her life experience and her Cherokee upbringing. And this work called Living in Process, she was developing and participating with, and had training groups, all in Europe and in South Pacific and North America. And so she was just a very wise woman. I think of her as her Indian name was Sacred White Eagle Woman, and that was given to her by the great Frank Foolscrow. And Foolscrow told her that the two of the things that were important about her name was, one was the word eagle, because the eagle flies higher than all other animals and sees more. And the second was woman, that it was really important that she was a woman to carry on the work she was doing. And I absolutely, those are two very important things to me and what I saw in Anne. And one was her certainly her eagle eye vision. I mean, she just saw a much broader, bigger picture than anybody I've ever seen or known or heard of. And that's really comes out in her books and in her speeches and in the way she lived her life and the people she taught. And she was just a great, very important person. I think that affected impacted a lot of lives. And so I'm sure later I'll think of more things, of wonderful things to say about her, but she was just great. And that's what comes up for me right now.
Yes, beautiful. What was the inspiration and intention for creating the Living in Process?
Well, again, it was all about process, and she was really good at following what was working. Her experience was that psychotherapy wasn't working. That it was she felt like that the psychotherapist had too much power, and that it was helping people adapt to a sick culture, which wasn't what she was about. And she just, I remember her telling stories about having these workshops, and she would just get together. I think originally at first it was all women, and that the women just had all this rage that they had to process, and it wasn't like they even needed to do much. They just needed to sit down and talk and let it come. And I think that was a lot of how the living and process work has always been a process, and has always evolved, and is still evolving now. And so I think that was a big piece of how it started. And then I think a little while later, she started doing a lot of work with addictions and recovery from addictions. And she wrote a lot of her books are about addictions. And so that became a big part of living in process work was, recovery from addictions and this, what she called the deep process work, the inner stuff that processes that came up with people when they, had the time and the space and weren't using something to keep it down. And so all that sort of just evolved. And again, I don't think she had a vision of like, this is what I'm going to do and this is what it's going to look like, as much as like, this is what's working and let's go with it. Like we even today we say sometimes people ask questions about what we do at our workshops, and we say, well, we don't really have like a cookie cutter model of what we do at each workshop. It depends on who's there and what issues come up. And I think that's really how Anne has always functioned, and how she worked with the living and process work. Just following the process and what fit and what was needed.
Right. It resonates like true in a way, because that's what life is. Yeah, there's no rehearsal, no.
Yeah, it's very organic. That was one of the things that I really liked about it. It's very organic. It's not, we're not trying to manipulate people or get somewhere else. It's sort of like what comes up, with the people that are doing the work is what's there to work with. And I love that. That seems so right.
Yeah. What is your own experience, Pete, with the living in process?
Well, I actually, I went to the University of Colorado, and that's where I met Anne. I was that was my college years were the worst 4 years of my life, and I was absolutely miserable and using addict. And I called up Anne. I heard about her work, and I called her up, and they told me about her workshops, and I went to one of her workshops, and I just felt like I was at home. I loved her. I loved the work. I loved the honesty. And so that was in 1986. And I've just been involved ever since. Any living in process function that I could get to, I got to it, all over the years. And I just always found it as just, I always found Anne really inspirational, and the work was just really helpful to me personally. And I saw other people around me healing and, dealing with all kinds of illnesses and issues. And that was always very inspiring to me, to see people healing, learning, healing and growing, and getting better, and, being able to come at the world in a more peaceful, loving way and sober. And so that's how I got involved, and that's why I've stayed. I eventually started working with Anne, helping her facilitate the groups I started in the early 90s doing that, and then being her assistant / manager for basically the last 25 years. And so yeah, I just loved Anne, and I loved the work we're doing, and so it was easy for me to stick around, and it's been a great ride.
Yeah, her work sounds very spiritual to me. And before I ask you questions about the living in process, more detailed, guess direct questions, I have to ask you these first. What is spirituality to you, and what is the difference between spirituality and religion?
Well, again, to me, I'm going to quote Anne again because it makes the most sense to me. And what fits for me is spirituality is participation. It's really simple. I mean, there's not even a lot more that I can say about that. The thing that's different for me about religion is I think spirituality is deeper and more encompassing than religion. I think, um, and used to talk about how living in process goes beyond like rituals. Like it was, before we were disconnected from our spirituality, we didn't need rituals, or we didn't have rituals. And it's like that's something that kind of came later. And I think that's what religion, I think that religion and a lot of other ways of doing things, not just religion, kind of can depend on some of the rituals or the form and lose sight sometimes of the spirituality. And so there's a big difference to me. Yeah, sometimes when I go to some religious ceremonies, it's like a different level of spirituality or something. It's more educational or intellectual sometimes, or even ritualized. And I just think that spirituality goes much deeper than that or further. And I think everything is spiritual, frankly.
Right, right. Yeah, so I read the information you sent to me, which says each of us has the possibility to move into our spiritual wisdom in link with the oneness of it all. Talk to me about this. I have to use the word concept or idea of oneness and wholeness. What is it?
Well, I think it is a reality that we are all connected, whether we want to believe that or not, or acknowledge that or not. I mean, we are connected. That's a fact. And whether I know people talk about being individual and doing things on our own, and the reality is that is not possible. I mean, we have to depend on the farmers to get the food, or and we have to depend on the nature to provide the food, and we have to depend on somebody to transport the food. It's like no matter what, we are connected to things, and I think I feel pretty good when I can remember or feel that connection to the oneness. And I think it's often, I know for me, before I got into this work, was one of the problems I was having is I didn't feel the oneness. I felt totally isolated. And I remember walking in the mountains in Boulder, Colorado, and thinking, I can't feel the mountains. It's like I see them, but I'm like, there's nobody here. And it's like I'd sort of lost my way from the connectedness of that. And I think that's a big problem in the world right now, is people they lose their way, or they lose their connectedness with the all that is, with the fact that we are one, with the earth, and we are the earth. We are part of it. We came from it and we go back to it. And so that's what I would say.
Yes. Yeah, and you also said the website, the material you sent to me said exactly that. We only have to remember and reconnect with what we have forgotten and moved away from. Why it's so easy to remember the pain and the separation, and it's so challenging to remember the oneness. Do you wonder why?
No, but I think that's a really good point. I think that's part of what we have to do, is deal with that pain and illness. And it's hard. It's like, again, quoting Anne, she said something like, we can't change without transformation, and we can't transform without change. And what that means to me is like, we may want to feel better and feel the oneness, but the truth is we're dealing with our awful abuse that we had as a child, and that's all we can see. And the good news is that healing is possible, but we can't just pretend that it's not there and sort of walk over it and look past it to this holy feelings or holy connectedness. And absolutely, I see this in the living process work all the time, is that people face into the pain and feel it and go through it and work through it. And that's what I mean. Like, then once they've transformed or they've changed, then they're in a different place, and they don't need to, try to bat down their feelings or, numb themselves in some way. And so I think it's just really important to accept what is, and if that's pain, that healing is possible, and it's hard to do that if you're trying to deny it all the time. So it's an interesting sort of paradox. If you feel the pain and you go into it, then you can come out the other side feeling the connectedness. And that's absolutely my experience. And I see that all the time with other people.
Wow. Yeah, that's wonderful when we have the courage to do that. It takes courage.
It does, yes.
Yeah, so speaking of the pain and all that, that brings me to the topic of addiction. It seems like addictions, they're very much connected to the past, especially the obsession with something that solid reality illusion that we create in our minds. So I guess that's my question. What is your definition of addiction?
Well, I think it could be that, what you just said, and it could be other things too. I mean, I think it could be really broad. I mean, often, I've heard alcoholics talk about how, they don't know why they drank. Sometimes they drank when they were happy, they drank when they were sad, they drank when it was sunny, they drank when it was rainy, they drank when they wanted to, they drank when they didn't want to, and that it's they don't know. It's a disease. And so I don't know. I don't know what causes it. I just know that recovery is possible, and see that, with people all the time, that they've overcome addictions and can get past it. It's easy to try to get caught up in trying to analyze what it is, and I think it's more productive to just try to work with it and work in recovery. And I've heard this phrase, analyzing is dying or something like that. I can't remember the phrase, or something like that. Analysis paralysis. That's what it was. Analysis paralysis.
And yes, in many ways, that's true. Do you believe in being recovered?
I do not. Again, my mantra seems to be process. I think I'm learning about process all the time, even, more and more all the time. I'm learning about how everything is process and everything is in process. And I just don't think anything is really static. It's impossible to be. I mean, even, when you say, like, who is Pete? I mean, I'm not static, and I know, again, the Native Americans, from what I've read, and heard, is that often they would change their names as their life went on. Like, they'd have a name when they were younger, and they'd have a name when they were older, and then they would name when they were even older. And that makes so much sense to me, because we're different people as our process unfolds. And so that's really the same way I see recovery. It's like, it's a process. It's never going to end. I mean, like, one time I heard a good analogy that I liked, is like, if you take, like, skiing, if you're going down the hill, you can fall and you can recover from the fall and get up, but it doesn't mean you're never going to fall again. And that I like that analogy always kind of spoke to me, of like, instead of trying to focus on, like, I'm recovered and that's it, I don't have to do anything anymore. It's like, I just don't believe that, even no matter how quote unquote spiritual one might get, it's like, there's always more work to be done. So.
Yeah, that makes me think about enlightenment, the idea of enlightenment, of a destination, of getting there and staying there.
Yeah.
from what I hear, and it sounds incredibly inviting and interesting. And it is being there, but at the same time here and in process, as you say, and healing. There's no there, right?
Yes.
Hmm. And everything might be it. And in the end, the there and here is just one. There's no two. So I have a few questions left before I ask you my final questions. I read on Anne's website about the living in process, different steps, stages, or different areas, the individual healing, and then family learning, institution growing, society's deep process work, and then the planet's new paradigm. Talk to me about these specific areas.
Sure. Well, in her book, Living in Process, she's got these spheres, and it's like each of the things that you mentioned are different spheres. Like there's the sphere of the self, and then there's the sphere of the family, and there's the sphere of the community, and there's the sphere of the nation, and then there's the sphere of the planet, and then there's the sphere of the universe. And all those things are sort of separate and intertwined at the same time. And, like, for example, one of the things we talk about at our facility in Montana, that's where we have a lot of our workshops and stuff like that. And we have this old Hot Springs hotel. It's about 125 years old. And we've been renovating it for the last 30 years or so. And, one of the things that we have said there is like, we can't heal the people until we heal the land. And we can't heal the land until we heal the building. And we can't heal the building until we heal the people. It's like we're all connected, in that way. And, I think that's, we don't do the work of living in process is on an individual basis. It can't be. We are in context. That is the reality, is that we are all in context. And, as we heal ourselves, our family gets healthier, and the community gets healthier, and the planet gets healthier. It's all intertwined, and I'm thinking, we were talking the other day about Samoan medicine, and traditional Samoan medicine. Someone would go to a Samoan healer, with an illness, and the healer would say, well, what's wrong in your family that this is happening to you? Or what's wrong in the environment that you're around that this is happening to you? Or what's wrong, it's like looking at the broader picture, not just, you have a virus or you have something. It's like, what's wrong with all the spheres? And that's what we're talking about. It's like, we're all connected. Again, it's all connected, and any kind of healing that we have on a smaller sphere is related to the healing that we have on the bigger spheres. So that's what I would say is that's what comes up for me with that. There's a lot within that, but that's, in a nutshell, that's how I see it right now.
Yeah, I love that everything's connected and dependent on one another, right?
Yes.
And then I guess my last question for you that just came to mind is, how do you envision, how do you imagine the whole planet and everything that's in it as everything, people and nature, healed?
Well, again, I don't know. I often think of, what it was like for the Native Americans. There was, or actually, what just popped into my mind was the Native Australians, the Australians Aboriginals. They lived on this, they've been here for, I don't know, 50,000 years or something like that. And, they've survived. They never destroyed the planet, and they got along. And I mean, of course, I'm sure it wasn't perfect, but this place was pretty good, years and years and years ago, and I think it's the same with North America, even that before the Europeans came there, it was a lot more peaceful here, and a lot more healing and cooperation and working together on stuff. So I think it can be done, that we all, can work together in harmony. And again, I love the title of Anne's books, that there will be 1,000 years of peace and prosperity, and they will be ushered in by the women. I do think that the women and indigenous peoples have something inherent in them that can bring to this planet, and help us heal. And again, I don't specifically have a picture in mind. As I mentioned earlier, I do think it would be a process, and that the solution will unfold. And I do think that we have had it here before, with the Native Americans and Native Australians and the Native Islanders and all the Native peoples of the world, had a much more peaceful existence and supportive existence than we have now. So.
Oh, wow. I like that, Pete. Yeah, that in a way we don't need imagination because we already have a reference from societies they were here before the new ones, right? So would you like to say or add anything before I ask you my final questions?
No, it's just enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you for calling.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I'm ready for the finale.
Yeah. What is success to you? What is to be successful?
Again, probably my answer to that question is going to change over time. I think, being myself as a success, and growing, learning and growing and healing, and striving to be the best person I can be, and, being of service, I think, is a success, and contributing to the planet. Participation. I think participation is a success. So.
Wow. Sounds really good. What was the hardest lesson to learn about yourself?
Oh my, I'm 56. There's way too many.
Oh, tell me about it.
I don't know. I just, again, I like I was saying earlier, I do think that anytime I come in touch with things that I don't like about myself, or pain that I have, my modus operandi is really to try to face into it and work with it and deal with it. And, I've certainly had lots of material to work with, and I've been doing my work and trying to get through it all. And so I think I'm doing pretty good. And I can't say there's one particular thing that was really the hardest for me to get over. So.
Yeah. Do you believe in unconditional self-love?
Well, I don't use those terms. I wouldn't use those terms. I would say that everything, that hasn't been my experience. I think maybe I'll speak for myself, but I think it's true in a really Western culture, is that unconditional is something that we really, I don't know that we have tons and tons of experience with that. I think we have, growing up in a dysfunctional addictive system that we've grown up in, there's so much conditional things and so many twisted dysfunctional things that it's, I don't know that myself or any one person can 100% of the time have unconditional love. At least not that grew up in an addictive family or an addictive system, which I think is what we all grew up in, at least in Western culture. However, I will say that recovery is possible. I do think that we can always get better at it, and learn, grow, and heal, So I again, like everything else I'm saying, I would say everything is a process, that I think we can always progress and get better at it. And I don't know that anything is going to be a static one-time thing that you'll always be that way. I don't know that I would say that about anything.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I like that. Unconditional self-love being a practice in the process. I like that. So I have two more questions here, perhaps three, perhaps. If you knew you would die soon, meaning leaving the body, would you change anything about your life or do anything differently?
Not today. Not today. I mean, the reason I say it is because that's the kind of question that we ask ourselves a lot, especially in light of the fact, for me personally, with Anne just dying, it's sort of like it was such a shock with her death. And it sort of brings home, it's almost like the world looks totally different to me now than before she died. And I've never had anybody so close to me die. And it's just like my whole worldview has changed. And so that's the kind of question that I'm always asking myself, like, what do I want to be doing? What do I want to be doing? Am I doing the right thing today? Is this what I want to be doing? And so honestly, I can't say that, we spend a lot of time in Hawaii. I'm often thinking, God, I wish I was in Hawaii, especially on a day like today when it's cold out. But really, I'm really satisfied today, and I'm glad I'm here. This is the right place for me, and I'm doing what I need to be doing. And so for today, I would say that I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing today.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer. Do you believe in life after death, or any kind of life after death?
I think so, yeah. I think one of the things that made sense to me is, the Native American, I don't know what to call it, belief, I guess, that life is a circle. I was talking about it, life is a circle. And so I think I would say that my belief is that extends to afterlife too, that we, if we have something that we need to work out in this life and we don't work it out, that we get another chance to work it out in another life. So it's impetus to get us going and to do our work. That's something that Anne used to say. I'm quoting her.
Yeah. And what are 3 things about life you know for sure as of now?
3 things that I know for sure. Life is a process. Absolutely. Life is a process, and it is in process. That was, again, one of the things that I think is totally obvious, but that most people don't see, is that everything is moving. Everything, my computer is moving. It's not the same new computer that it was a year ago, and the pages of a book are moving, and humans are everything's moving. Everything about us is moving. So I would say certainly that the only thing that's constant is change. Things are moving. I'm not sure what else that I can definitively say. I mean, the sun is going to come up, but God, who knows? And I think coronavirus has been such a kind of a good learning in, like, if you thought you could count on certain things, I think coronavirus has sure changed a lot of people's minds about what they thought they could count on. Like, who could have even pictured that these big major cities could completely shut down? I mean, that seems impossible to me, that everybody would agree to that. And there you go. There it was. So it's.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much for your presence and your wisdom, and for being genuine, your honesty. Thank you. I guess my last question is, where can we find more information about you, your work, products, services, and future projects?
Livinginprocess.com, www.livinginprocess.com. There's also a lot of information on AnnWilsonSchaef.com, www.AnnWilsonSchaef.com. Both of those we put the workshops up on livinginprocess.com, and there's more information about Ann's books and about the work and how to contact us, stuff like that. So.
Thank you so much again, Pete, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, thank you very much. It was nice talking to you.
Yeah, the same here. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about Pete Sidley, please visit his website, livinginprocess.com.
To learn more about this podcast, please visit fitforjoy.org/podcast. I want to thank the Patreon members, Lawrence McGrath, Mark Basden, Terry Clayton, and Aidan Vickrock. Thank you again for listening, and bye for now.